The Drum Candy Podcast is brought to you by Drum Factory Direct.
Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome into episode 3 of season 3 of the Drum Candy Podcast. This is your host, Mike Dawson, coming to you from Drum Factory Direct in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm not sure if I've ever even described what Drum Factory Direct is, but it is an e-commerce site. So if you're looking for replacement parts for pretty much any type of drum, lugs, hoops, tension rods, washers, screws, spurs, we have all that. We also have all assortment of, the widest range of drum head selection, drumsticks. There's some stands and hardware, drum shells if you want to build out your own drums. So if you haven't yet, head over to drumfactorydirect.com and have a look around. Okay, this season, if you haven't figured it out already, what we've done is we are blowing out the format from season 2. So instead of cramming interviews and lessons and gear talk all into one episode, we're going to give each of those segments a full episode. So episode 1 was our 10 Reasons to Love. We did Steve Gadd. We're going to continue that monthly, once a month. And then episode 2 was Heavy Gear Talk. We talked about the Maple Snare Drum Shootout with Carter McLean. And here for the third episode, we are doing a long form interview, and we have David Throckmorton in the studio, and he is interviewing Kush Abadey. Kush has been super active on the New York City jazz scene since he was a teenager. He's worked with everyone from Ravi Coltrane and Chris Potter and Nicholas Payton, and most recently with saxophonist Miss Melissa Aldana. And right at the time of this interview, he was just about to go on a jazz cruise with singer Dee Dee Bridgewater. So it's a fun interview. David and Kush had met at a festival, I believe earlier this year or last summer. So it's cool to just have two guys in that world. This is what they would probably talk about backstage. So let's get to it with Kush Abadey.
So how are you, man?
Cool. I'm good, dude. It's been a minute. Yeah.
I saw you last. I saw you we hung a little bit in Rochester, I think it was.
Yeah, during the fest.
Yeah. And then did you play the Pittsburgh Festival with Melissa as well?
Did we play Pittsburgh? I can't remember, man.
He was on the bill. I just didn't know if you were on the date, but I got there after you guys had finished that day. We played later that day.
Yeah, I think we might have played Pittsburgh. We played so many festivals after that.
Right. It was like on a soccer field. Does that ring a bell? Like 3 stages. Okay. Maybe somebody subbing or something.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It's all fog now, man.
Yeah, I hear you, man. And you're about to go out on the jazz cruise, correct?
I am. Yeah, I'm going out with Dee Dee Bridgewater.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, we were supposed to do the last jazz cruise, but of course, because of the pandemic, they canceled all the cruises. So they actually were able to get us on this one coming up. So it's cool. It'll be my first cruise.
Yeah, I haven't done one of those, man. There's some talks about us doing one of those with Dan maybe next year, but
nice.
See, man,
Nice. Yeah.
So I appreciate you doing this right before you're about to leave, man. It's great to see you and talk to you, man.
Likewise.
So I just wanted to ask you first. My father was a drummer.
Right.
So I was, that's not super uncommon, but I wanted just to hear a little bit about, maybe you could speak a little bit about your dad and how you started playing, if you wouldn't mind talking about that.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's I feel like that's one of the biggest inspirations, not just in my music and my drumming, but in my life.
Yeah.
So I was really lucky to have a father who really saw my interest in something that he was doing professionally, and instead of forcing me to do it the right way or forcing me to, stay focused with it, he just kind of guided me in the right way.
Yeah.
And he was able to see how I was, having more and more of an interest in it. So I really appreciated that he did it that way.
Yeah.
But he's originally from Pittsburgh. Actually, he was born in Pittsburgh.
I think you mentioned it. I think you briefly mentioned that, and I actually started to watch a long interview with your dad that I'm about halfway through, and he mentioned that, and then that rang a bell, and I remembered you telling me that briefly.
Right.
Before I think he went to Buffalo after that. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah, he was raised in Buffalo. Basically.
Okay.
And he had 3 other siblings, and no one else played music. His parents weren't necessarily music inclined. I wouldn't even go as far to call them fans.
Yeah.
But But later on, it actually became known to my father that his father had an interest in wanting to play the drums.
Okay.
And he didn't find that out until when he was on his deathbed.
Oh, wow.
So that's it's a very interesting little detail there. But yeah, my dad, kind of grew up in Buffalo and came up playing with a lot of the bands that would come through Buffalo. Actually,
sure.
Between him and my uncle Virgil Day on my mother's side.
Okay.
He was able to play with people like Freddie Hubbard and Dexter Gordon.
Oh, wow.
All these people to come through.
Would that have been was that like in the 80s or 70s?
This is more in we're talking early 70s, late 60s, because my dad just turned 75.
Okay.
So he was born in 47. So he was still in Buffalo around pretty much mid to late 60s, early 70s.
Okay.
And then he kind of migrated to New York City at some point.
Okay.
Yeah, for a brief little stint, maybe like a year and a half.
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah.
And do you have siblings, or are you the only child, or?
Yeah, I have 3 other siblings. I have 4. I have 2 sisters and 2 brothers.
Is anyone involved in music other than yourself?
I'm the only one that's doing it for profession or professionally,
Yeah.
They all have an interest in music, and they all love music and love jazz and love the music my dad plays and everything, but no one decided to go down that route professionally.
Yeah. Okay. And are you the youngest as well also?
I am also the youngest.
Okay. Yeah, I was the youngest. I just have an older brother that plays, but he played pretty seriously for a while, but it's interesting having that around. I mean, I have 2 sons that are getting a little older now. I'll be 50 in January, and my kids are about to be 20 and 17, and they didn't really mess with the drums being around the house at all until the last few years, which just baffled me because when I grew up, you were fighting for time on the drums, and you couldn't leave them alone. Were you playing? Were you just playing around the drums before you eventually got serious? How did that happen?
Well, I've always been surrounded by the drums. I don't really know life at that age around 2 or 3 without having some kind of percussion around, because my dad's drums were always set up, and he would practice every day, and he had a bunch of different types of percussion, marimbas and xylophone and a piano. And when I was around 2 or 3, I was gifted a little child's junior drum kit by one of my dad's drummer friends. And I had that kit for a long time, actually. I kind of grew out of that kit, but that kit was the thing that kind of made me want to, I felt it was my size, I felt like, oh, I don't have to sit on my dad's lap to play drums anymore.
Yeah, sure.
And once I started playing that every day, my dad pretty much said, okay, well, I'll teach you some stuff. The first thing I learned was clave at 2.
Wow.
He just taught me the rhythm, and I would just play it with 2 sticks on a cowbell. That was almost as my size.
Yeah.
And, I think around 7 or so might've been when I started practicing every day.
Okay.
Seriously, actually doing stuff, trying to figure stuff out, playing things, mimicking things that I had heard either him do or watching Elvin or Tony or Billy Joe do something.
Yeah.
So I've pretty much always been into, practicing the drums. And you talk about that, who was going to get on the drums first. That was me and my dad.
Okay. Yeah.
It's pretty much all my upbringing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you, when you were really young playing like that, and you said just trying to mimic things you heard, how much of that was playing along to recordings or trying to play along stuff? Or was it more just, you'd hear stuff and then in your own time try to assimilate that or try to replicate the sounds you were hearing, or both?
I gotta say it's a good mixture of both, you know. I feel like I've always been listening to records and trying to and wanting to play along to records. I feel like that's where I got most of my I feel like that was where most of my focus was
Okay.
kind of playing two records to my dad's records. Of course, anything if he had taken me to a show, or if I had ever watched him practice or seen him play, I was always trying to mimic those things as well.
Okay.
But I can remember at least as far back as 7 or 8 or 9, consistently playing to records.
Yeah.
And trying to like get the vibe, trying to get the sound.
Sure.
Like, you know, I think the most I did at that point was Max Roach.
Okay.
That's why I was really, because it felt accessible, and he was so melodic.
Yeah.
And so precise, and had such a beautiful beat and momentum. And the music he had played to, most of the cats he had played with, or his bands, it felt happy, it felt good. I wanted to listen to the music itself.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So that, around that same time, you're playing with Max, checking out Max and others, I'm sure, as well as your dad. I mean, you're a good bit younger than I am. Like I said, I'll be 50 in January this month. You're early 30s, is that right?
I'm 31. Yeah. I'm a September kid.
Okay. So, I mean, this isn't that long ago. I mean, were you playing groove music as well as a young kid, or was it jazz first?
It was jazz first for sure. I didn't get into like pocket playing, or I didn't even really have an interest in it until I pretty much got to like middle school, late middle school, early high school. I had friends that kind of introduced me to like, well, I will say this, actually. My introduction to funk was more through my dad's generation. So I was listening to like Billy Cobham,
sure,
and later Tony, and
sure,
all that.
Era.
And then that era of, so that was my like, oh, that's what funk is like, which it is, and then James Brown and P-Funk and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But my dad wasn't like a huge fan of that stuff, so it wasn't like,
you weren't hearing it all the time.
I wasn't hearing it all the time. My dad's pretty hardcore, jazz heavy.
Sure.
And so was I pretty much until I got to high school,
Well, not to skip over things, but when you started to check that stuff out,
right?
Did you get serious about it? I mean, I've heard you play some things that have that side of it, but I've heard you play more, straight ahead jazz or modern kind of straight ahead, acoustic kind of music,
right?
Jazz sounding drums versus like a rock or a fusion kind of funk sounding kit. You know what I mean?
Sure.
I mean, when you started to hear, play more groove stuff or more pocket stuff, or even, I mean, you grew up, were you in DC or Baltimore?
I was in DC, a bit outside of DC, maybe 20 minutes outside Maryland.
Yeah.
Much closer to DC.
Okay. So, I mean, not to jump onto what I know about that scene, I mean, being from Pittsburgh, I mean, but I'm sure you probably would see Dennis or Sean Rickman or some of these guys that came from a little more of that world than the straight ahead
thing.
So did you have any real passion for that kind of playing, or did you really jump into that at all, or was it always more, I can do that, I enjoy that, but I want to play jazz?
Oh, it was absolutely. I got absolutely immersed in the whole Dennis Chambers and Sean Rickman and Ricky Wellman. Was a big fan of mine. I pretty much had these like funny little phases throughout my high school, and I was always heavy into jazz. I never stopped listening to jazz, and that was my focus, especially what I was getting called to do. I started playing professionally at like 13. So all my gigs were straight ahead gigs.
Yeah.
But I was so deep into like trying to play. I wanted to play. At a certain point, I was setting up my drums just like Dennis Chambers.
Sure.
Tuning them just like, and trying to play all the, I got pretty close, like into what I thought was close, into that style of playing.
Sure.
Copying his solos and then getting deep into like Vinnie Colaiuta and Dave Weckl.
Sure.
Steve Smith.
That's kind of the world. I mean, I was born in 73. I don't want to talk much about myself. I'm just trying to, for just conversation. I mean, my dad came from a jazz background as well as like a show band kind of background. Mm-hmm. My dad played a gig in Pittsburgh for years when I was a really young kid. This club called the Holiday House, where he played 363 days a year at the same venue for a few years, which is just insane, you know?
Yeah, that's hardcore.
And a lot of that music was playing back in different traveling acts that would come through, and sometimes they would take him out on the road and whatnot. But having an older brother that played, you know, when I was in 8th grade, it's kind of when like Sco was playing with Dennis, or when Weckl was playing with Chick. So I was like the right age at the, like, when that stuff was actually happening, you know?
Right.
So, and then I kind of heard my dad playing jazz records in the house, whether it be Oscar Peterson's Trio or Miles with Tony or, you know, whatever, even like 70s stuff, like stuff with Harvey Mason or Mike Clark, like funkier stuff, you know? But I kind of came back around the jazz through, like, you know, Vinny and Weckl and Dennis and those kind of guys. So I was just curious about that. Like, if there was a period, what you're saying, you got really into Dennis and those guys, you know?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, and it was really deep because each person I spent, like, I kind of had put them all into a certain category just because they seemed to kind of cycle around each other's gigs. And, you know, if I'd go see Mike Stern, you know, I saw Mike Stern for the first time with Dennis, and then I saw him with Dave Weckl. So I always put all these people in like, oh, they're just playing on each other's gigs. They kind of have similar styles. And I got really deep into each one for like, you know, a year or like a few months here or there.
Sure.
And I got kind of this idea that, I found my guy. I'm just going to play like this person.
Sure.
From the rest of my career, you know, very high school mentality.
Of course, yeah. It's like, that's a young way of thinking.
Yeah, it's a young.
It's exciting. It's just very exciting, though.
Well, it's exciting to start to actually figure out what they're doing, or at least get closer to it.
Sure.
Than you were before, and it, it's super fun.
Yeah.
You know. But I did circle back. Like, I wouldn't say I circled back. I would say I never really left the straight ahead.
Yeah.
You know, scene or wanting to play more straight ahead, but it was much more natural for me.
Yeah.
So I felt like I didn't have to work on it as much as I did the pocket playing, the James Brown grooves. You know,
sure.
The kind of for lack of a better word, the gospel chops type of,
I understand.
You know, stuff.
Yeah.
I actually felt like I had to practice that stuff, you know, and start to listen to it more often. You know, because the jazz stuff was just ingrained in me so early.
Right. Well, I feel like, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, your age, for instance, like for me, like I said, when I was in the years where you have this heavy nostalgia, when you think back and when you're really figuring some stuff out and trying to learn, you know, for me, like ages, you know, 14 through like 21, like you're like really, you know, there's so much growth through that time if you're playing at that age. And those years for me were those years I said where, you know, Dennis is playing all these records and Weckl and Vinny and Will Kennedy. Like you could go on, you know. And then circling back to jazz and older records and newer records happened a little bit after that for me. But I feel like at your age, maybe the trendy thing, sure, gospel chop stuff is big and a lot of people want to do that. But I mean, I think a lot of the name players at the time, or the hot players, whatever that means, it had become a little more acoustic than maybe in the late 80s through the 90s, early 90s, where it was a little more, like the fusion thing seemed a little more accessible or prominent, you know, not prominent over straight ahead, but there was just more of that happening and more artists leaning that way that later maybe went back to playing more straight ahead, you know?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I feel like when I was coming up, I kind of got the tail end of when fusion was still an happening genre. Like it was actually happening.
Sure.
You could go to a gig and it was like, oh, this is a fusion band.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And a lot of those drummers like Dave Weckl or Caluta were put in that category
of course,
fusion drummers. And then I guess now looking back, a lot of the drummers that I started to be influenced by later on when I was like maybe junior, senior in high school, like Ronald Bruner Jr. or Thomas Pridgeon or even a lot of the gospel cats specifically, or pop cats like Aaron Spears or all those kind of cats. I realized that they were heavily influenced by the Calutas and the Weckls and Dennis.
Yeah.
So I found that same correlation. I was like, yeah, we're all into the same stuff. I had just gone through a deeper route because I had seen that it's kind of the foundations of it started with people like Tony, and Jack DeJohnette and Billy Cobham. And I realized that we all had that in common too, because we were all Tony heads. We were all like, Jack DeJohnette fans. But a lot of these cats that I was so inspired by, and that I even had a pleasure to like grow up around. Like, I'm from DC, so it's Aaron Spears, and I went to high school with a lot of cats that were friends of his.
Sure.
But I realized my depth and my how much I had been rooted in the acoustic playing in the beginning.
Yeah.
I never really saw the disconnect, or I just saw that was always going on. That was always, that was always a foundation of mine. So I didn't have to I feel like there's like this movement now going back into, like you got like pop cats or rock cats going back to like Art Blakey or Elvin Jones or, and seeing where a lot of their idols got a lot of their stuff from.
Sure.
Which is great. I think it's really good to follow that lineage from the beginning.
Right. It's I mean, it's funny though, like you mentioned Aaron and Ronald Bruner and Thomas, and you can name 4 other guys or 20 or whatever, and maybe some of those I would have a slight different feeling about, but you more than them, and not all your ages are exactly the same or anything like that. Even though you've checked out a lot of the same stuff, I don't hear the jazz sensibility quite as much in their playing as I do yours. Now that might be just the way their gigs, the direction their careers have gone. Doesn't mean they couldn't play. I'm not trying to knock anybody. I love those guys, are all phenomenal.
Sure.
But I mean, since the first time I heard you, like one of the things that jumped right out to me, like the first time I saw you, I think was just this real beautiful control of the softer end of the dynamic range at the instrument, which is a really hard thing to develop, especially if you come up playing loud music.
Sure, of course, yeah.
Were you thinking about playing? I mean, you had a great teacher in the house with your father and around all this music, but I mean, were you playing? I don't want to say just soft, but were you developing that touch really young, or did that come later?
Well, when I got to be about 12, I think 12 is when my dad he enrolled me in this school in the DMV called the Levine School of Music. And there was a teacher there who he had studied with prior, named Tom Teasley, who is still very
I know
active.
Who that is. Yeah.
Yeah, Tom.
Yeah.
So I studied with Tom for a number of years throughout high school. And he pretty much got all of my kind of like, molded me into a complete percussionist / drummer. So I studied snare drum with him. I studied timpani. I studied marimba. I studied reading. I studied, and I also studied jazz with him. So it was like a very complete form of musical education.
Okay.
focused on the drums. And I took that into everything I was started to do later on in life. And so I've always had a strong orchestral percussion background without having, like, I played in some junior orchestras here and there, but I never saw myself going like deep into that. But I do have those abilities because I studied it pretty thoroughly. So I would say I was lucky enough to be well-rounded by the time I got to college.
Okay.
You know, with dynamics and touch and feel and technique. You know?
Yeah. I mean, it's a tough thing in some ways because, I mean, I remember when I was 25, my first kind of name gig was playing with Maynard Ferguson's band when I was 25. Right. My first gig was on my 25th birthday. And it was a loud band, you know?
Sure.
And there was tons of dynamics, of course. We would play soft, but I mean, the loud end was, I couldn't play loud. I mean, I could play as loud as I wanted, you know? And Maynard was very giving and he was just very encouraging. Play, do your thing, do whatever you want. Like he liked me, which helped that. But I remember coming off that band and playing a gig with a great Brazilian singer, like a restaurant gig. And I was capable of playing really quiet, but I just had this like realization, like, man, I need to be able to play way quieter than I'm playing. And it was quiet. Like, it was very quiet. But it was just this kind of reminder, like, oh man, you don't know anything. Like, you need to really, really work on that. And has that been a process for you, or did you ever have to think about that side of it, or was it just the music informs us of how to play? Or if you're a thinking and sensitive musician, the last thing we want to do is be, a bull in a china shop. You want to play the music, but you have a really beautiful handle on it that there's tons of great players, but I mean, that jumped out at me right off the bat when I heard you. It was just this real beautiful touch, Well,
thank you. I appreciate that very much. I definitely got very humbled when I moved to New York. And for a number of reasons, but I would say the main handful of reasons is because when I graduated high school, right before I did, I was able to start playing with the great late Wallace Roney.
Right. I want to bring that up eventually. Yeah.
I played with Wallace for about 6 years, and going into Berkeley, I went in with an international gig. So that was already. I never found myself or considered myself as an arrogant person.
Yeah.
But having that going into school does give you some air of confidence that everyone else doesn't really possess, And at a school like Berkeley, I wasn't the only one like that. My roommate was Justin Faulkner. He had just joined Branford at the time.
Sure. Yeah.
I went to school with Joe Dyson, who was playing with Donald Harrison at the time. And Jonathan Pitson, who was playing with everybody at the time. Mark, the list goes on. It's really kind of a crazy drum time at it Berkeley.
Sounds like it. Yeah.
But I moved to New York around 2012 and still had the Wallace gig. But what I found was I couldn't adapt everything I was doing in Wallace's band to every gig that I would get called to do in New York.
Sure.
And that was a very abrupt lesson, because I had kind of gone in with the same confidence that I did at Berkeley. Because I had a gig, I was like, oh, well, I'll get gigs here. New York is going to be really good, warm to me. And it really took me like a good 2 years to start working consistently outside of Wallace. And that took a lot of dedication to how to relearn how to play dynamics, really.
Sure.
because what I had understood dynamically in Wallace's band is very different. Not to say we didn't play dynamically, but I was still learning how to play in that band too. I was still growing up.
Yeah.
So I still had to, I felt like I've always had a decent understanding of how to play a room.
Yeah.
You know, because my dad was the one who really kind of taught me that in the beginning. But with being that young and playing with someone like Wallace, you know, there are still things to learn in control and moderation and when to do certain things.
Yeah.
And I think also being so influenced, that band being so influenced by the great second quintet of Miles Davis.
Sure.
There's a lot of elements that I think people think it's one thing, and it's really so layered in so many other things that a lot of people don't actually execute or touch on, i.e. dynamics.
Yeah.
Or space, you know,
Yep.
or touch, or even just musicality in general.
Sure.
So I definitely had that like awakening or abrupt, rude awakening at certain points that over the years, after I left Wallace and started to get more calls, I really did, you know, knuckle down and try to hone in on how to create more of a versatile approach to dynamics and to technique, and also just playing stylistically accurate for whatever I was being called for.
Sure.
And I think that took a good like solid 5 years for me to completely, because it's a lot. It's not like a simple thing to do. It's almost you have to kind of reacclimate or just transform your playing in a way in a scene that is constantly growing and evolving.
Yeah.
You know, and constantly looking for the new thing, or constantly, you know, trying to recreate or reinvent itself. It's a very vibrant, active scene, you know. So I definitely went through that for sure.
Yeah.
And it wasn't always fun.
Yeah. I mean, but those are, it's great to have those experiences that, I mean, you know, I hope I just continue to have those where you're learning new properties of the instrument and of music in general. You know, it's just fun to play in new situations and try to figure out whatever the riddle is to make that, whatever that music is, that little zone to be able to you know, to execute that, and it's in a musical appropriate way, whatever that is, you know.
Sure.
I mean,
sure.
Wallace's gig, and let's talk about that for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you were really young. What were you, 16 when you joined Wallace?
I was 16. I was 15 and a half when I first sat in with him, with the band. And I was 16 when he officially had asked me to join the band.
Yeah, that's insane, man. I mean, there's such a strong, like you brought up Miles' second quintet, Wallace obviously playing with sorry, man, I guess it was on the screen I'm trying to get away from. Okay, sorry.
All good.
The association with Tony's band, you know, the band with Billy Pierce and Mulgrew and everyone.
Sure.
I mean, how was there a lot of talk about Tony from Wallace, or was it just like do your thing, like you know, how much direction did he give you? How much did he just let you do your thing? You were so young, you know.
Yeah, I was so young, so impressionable. I was still growing. I think anyone who knew Wallace would know that. I mean, you could talk about Tony every day, and something new would pop up. You know, same with Miles, same with Art Blakey. I mean, the way he would talk about these people was in such a he had so much honor and respect for them, but also you could tell how much he really knew these people more than a lot of people claimed to know them.
Yeah.
You know, especially Tony, because he was very close to Tony, and you know, I think he's the only non-drummer that I know that knows,
of course,
more about drums than most drummers.
Yeah.
Simply because he loved the instrument so much, but because he got an opportunity to play with most of the great drummers of that time that were still around,
Sure.
that kind of engineered bebop and post-bop playing. And he was just a sponge, he constantly asked questions. He's like, Buhena, why do you tune the drums like that? Or Elvin, why do you do this? He was so curious. But yeah, I mean, we talked about Tony like all the time. We talked about Miles all the time. We talked about Dizzy a lot. We talked about Clark Terry a bunch. We talked about Art Blakey all the time.
Sure.
We talked about Elvin all the time.
Yeah.
It's because he really loved these people, but he really learned so much from these people.
Well, that's such a great thing about playing with older musicians in general. Is just like being a sponge and just wanting to hear all these stories. I mean, it's just that's just great that you have to experience that, especially so young. It had to be so
Really?
impressionable. That's amazing, man.
It really was a beautiful thing.
So back to school for a second. Did you finish at Berkeley? Like your?
No, I didn't finish. I did I did about four semesters, something like that.
Okay.
And then I split. I went back home to DC for about a year.
Okay.
Just to like save up some money and play some more and just like be outside of the scholastic environment, just to try to figure out what I really wanted to do, how I wanted to do it. I mean, I knew that New York was gonna be the move. I just didn't know I was gonna do it. I didn't want to do it like right away, right, fresh out of school.
Yeah.
But then I eventually moved to New York. Yeah, about a year later.
So what were you, 20 when you went to New York?
I was 20 when I moved. Yeah.
Who were some of the? I mean, I know a lot of people you've played with, but can you talk a little bit about your early days in New York for you? What you were kind of who you were playing with, mostly, or what was really important to you, maybe your first couple of years in New York?
Sure. Yeah. I was lucky enough to, like I said, go to New York with a gig, and with a gig with someone who everyone knew.
Yeah.
So that definitely created some type of curiosity and buzz about like, oh, well, who's this kid that's playing with Wallace?
Sure.
And even though you have that, there is still this funny thing that happens in New York where you can go and hang out and people meet you, and they meet you 5 or 6, 7 times and they don't remember you, haven't heard you yet.
Yeah.
And because that's the memorable thing that happens.
Of course.
When someone strikes your attention, it's like, oh, it's because you heard them and you realize you met them like twice already,
Yeah.
So that happened a lot. And at a certain point, I was definitely starting to get a couple of calls from a couple of people, just to like do a lot of sub work for a lot of the cats that were already around and playing. I did a lot of subbing for Marcus Gilmore. I did a lot of subbing for Justin Brown. I got called by people like Steve Teray and Nick Payton and to do all these like, just like people were trying me out a lot.
Sure.
And not all, sometimes some stuff stuck. Sometimes it didn't stick. It just wasn't the right, or I wasn't ready for something at the time. I remember I was lucky enough to get a tour request from Buster Williams. And the first time it happened, I couldn't do it because I had some obligations with Wallace, but I realized now, looking back, I was able to do another tour with him about 5 years later. And looking back, I realized I would not have been ready. I was not ready for that.
Sure.
At the moment when he first initially called me. And then I guess maybe my like second year in New York, year and a half in, something like that. There was this piano player who was from New York named Theo Hill. And he called me to do a gig with Frank Kuumbalesi, a great trombonist. And that band called the Smalls Legacy Band at Smalls Jazz Club. And at this point, it wasn't even, I don't even think it was called that yet. We were just doing like the jam session at the end of the night, you know. So
Yep.
I did that gig a few times with Josh Evans on trumpet and various bass players, maybe Ben Williams at some point, Amin Salim, Rashawn Carter, Corcoran Holt. You know, these are great New York bass players. And so I did that gig a lot, and it was kind of the gig I had. It was one of those things where I had a gig every week.
Yeah.
And I was playing with the same band every week. And that was, you know, that's a very rare thing, especially in this day and age.
Yeah.
And so that kind of like propelled a lot more opportunities for me, because Smalls is a club where you can, there's a lot of, you know, it's a lot of coverage. I mean, you can, and exposure, you know. So I was being seen every week, and I got a lot of gigs based off of just being there.
Yeah.
And so I got a lot of different calls and opportunities to, again, more sub work. You know, that's kind of like how the thing happens in New York. You sub enough and you sub for all these people, and then usually you become a permanent member, you know, if you're good enough. So yeah, I got really lucky to be in the right place at the right time, I feel like.
Was that band with Frank, would you rehearse at all? Or was it just show up at the gig and play?
We would play. It was almost like we played like the same tunes every week.
Okay.
You know, so it was almost like every gig was a rehearsal.
Yeah.
You know, and the gig had already kind of been set. They were using a lot of different drummers, trying a lot of cuts. And I think once I played with them, it just kind of stuck. I kept getting called for that gig.
Yeah.
And then it became a name for it, and then we did a live record. And then it just became a thing, you know. We almost took the band on the road a few times, but you know, I think some things fell through for unforeseen circumstances. But yeah, it was a band very fully intact, but it wasn't like you know, we didn't rehearse, or we didn't, you know, go on the road or anything like that. And we were very obviously free to do other gigs, but but it did feel like very much like a special thing.
Yeah, because you had that, like you said, it was a weekly thing. You could develop this, you know, you were playing in that setting as well as the band's identity and what you were trying to, you know, to develop as a group, which is important. It's nice to have that. A band with some familiarity where you can, you know, get, you know, develop these connections musically with the other players, but to develop a sound of a band is such a great thing, you know.
Yeah, it was beautiful. You know, I miss those days sometimes.
Were you at this point trying to lead any dates, any gigs or any bands, and are you doing that much now?
At the moment, I'm not doing so much of that. I'm writing a lot though, so I do have.
Do you play piano?
I play piano as well.
Okay.
I actually started playing piano when I was 6. That was another thing my dad was very adamant about. He's like, if you're going to do this and be into music, I think every musician should know how to play the piano.
Yeah.
So I started taking official lessons with a jazz and classical pianist. And then I just kept doing it. Even through high school, middle school and high school, I went to school as a piano major. They were art.
Oh, wow.
They were art high schools. And I didn't actually play drums for a lot of that time. I mean, I was playing gigs and stuff, but I wasn't every day in school playing drums. I was actually playing classical piano.
Were you thinking about the drums a lot though, even though you weren't playing?
All the time.
I mean, did you consider yourself a drummer, or were you not sure which way you were going to go? You know,
I knew exactly what I was going to do.
Okay.
It was more just to be in school and to be part, because they didn't have there was no it wasn't like a drum program. It was like you could be a band, be in concert band, or you could be, you know. And it just made more sense for some reason to enter in with the piano.
Yeah.
But I was practicing every day on drums
still,
and I was playing gigs on drums. So it was I had such a duality in that time of my life. And I've been actually practicing a lot more classical piano these days and a lot more just trying to get my chops back.
Yeah, that's great,
You know?
man. I wish I would have played young. I mean, I could fool around a little bit, but I always think I'm gonna maybe one of these days try to take it a little more serious. But who knows, man? You play. I mean, it sounds silly, but I almost feel like I can hear that in your playing that you play piano. It's like there's I don't know, certain players that have that they play. You can almost hear it in their playing.
No,
that might sound ridiculous when I hear Jack. Like knowing that he plays piano, it just makes so much sense to me,
I agree. I completely agree. And same with someone like Brian Blade, who,
completely
also, plays chordal instruments and piano and guitar and sings. So you can hear
so much music in the drumming. Yeah.
Sensitivities that he has towards that musicality. Yeah,
for sure. I'm kind of jumping all over the place. You have to excuse me.
It's all good. That's how my brain works.
So. Yeah, I remember when we first talked. Well, the first time I met you was you said it on a tune or two at a gig of mine at Con Alma in Pittsburgh.
That was Con Alma. I remember that.
You were in town with Ravi and Oren was on the gig, and
right.
And we exchanged. I handed you the sticks and you played, and I came back and I remember you saying, man, you got some nice cymbals, which is always a great thing to hear. But we didn't get to really kick it that night. But when we talked in Rochester, as soon as we started hanging, we started talking about gear.
Right.
Sometimes that can go south, or you can really hit it off with somebody. And you were like, same with when I met Obed the first time. It was like we just started geeking out on gear right away, and it's like, oh, cool, we're like minds,
Yeah.
So it was fun. Let me ask you about Wallace's gig. When you played Wallace's gig, were you playing a bebop kit at that point, or were you playing a bigger setup?
Well, the interesting thing about Wallace's gig is that I was playing his drums.
Okay, that was my next question. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's kind of how his band operated for a long time, because he had so many drums.
Yeah.
And he also had a kit of Tony's drums from like the later 80s. And so he had a lot of drums made for him. He had a very good relationship with Gretsch, and he had a great relationship with a lot of different freelance drum makers.
Yeah, and I've heard some about this. Yeah.
And some relationships went south, and some, more south than others. And so I pretty much my whole 6-year stint, I was playing his drums, and there were 4 different kits that I can remember specifically. The first one I ever played on was what you would call the sizes of everything a bop kit.
Okay,
but it was a specially made kit. That was kind of a kit that someone made for Gretsch.
Okay.
And Gretsch was kind of eyeing it and wanted to make another version of it. Mm-hmm. And it was a very specific kit. I remember this kit was so heavy because the bass drum was like 30 ply.
Okay, yeah.
And it was like the bronze hoops, and there was like, all the hardware was super heavy. I hated lugging that kit around.
Yeah.
But we used to actually travel on the road with that kit.
That's crazy.
It was like a ruby red 12-inch mounted top, 14, and then there were a couple snares with it. But it was mainly like a 5.5. There was actually so some of the hardware on it was like Rogers, like the old school Rogers kit. Like, so the mount was a Rogers mount, and the way the Gretsch was on the drum, written on the drum, was like as if Rogers was written on the drum.
Oh, like a script thing.
Like a script, yeah. So it was a very specific custom specs for Wallace that he wanted for that kit. And then throughout the years, he had another kit made by Gretsch. It was a solid shell kit, and those the same sizes. It was almost like it's like a beige, like a lighter, very natural, like oaky, woody looking kit. And then there was like this like light ice blue, almost maybe like teal kit. That was.
I feel like I've seen pictures of that.
Yeah,
that finish rings a bell. Yeah,
that's a really funny kit. I mean, that's a really fun kit. That was a fun kit to play. I think that might have been an actual vintage kit from the 50s.
Okay.
That he got restored. And then there was a fourth kit in there somewhere, and I can't.
Oh, it's not important. I can't
remember. You know? But that was pretty much the kit that I played on. It was the bop sizes.
Yeah.
You know.
And pretty much that's what you're playing most of the time now, correct? I mean, majority of the time playing
majority of the time. Yeah, I love a good, 18, 12, 14, maybe 16 floor, but usually I like to keep it simple.
Yeah.
Vary up the snare sizes a little bit, but
yeah. I know when I saw you with Melissa's group, you were playing the Istanbul Agop or Agop stuff, which sounded great. How long have you been with them?
That was a relationship that started with Wallace.
Okay.
So as soon as I began with Wallace, because he actually had an endorsement with Istanbul, and he had them. He was working on some cymbals. Wallace was a very interesting cat when it came to the drums. He also had a relationship with Zildjian.
Sure.
And he had there's
a lot of urban legend about all this stuff.
Yeah. So, but anyway, the Istanbul has been with since about I was like 16, 17.
Oh wow.
More officially in the later years, because I was kind of softly with them and I was like shopping around and stuff.
Yeah.
I hadn't signed any paperwork or nothing like that. But now I am officially on the artist roster. And I think they're the greatest cymbals made now.
Yeah, they make really beautiful stuff, man. They're great. I have a few things of theirs I really like. I mean, there's one cymbal that it's, pretty much ends up on every gig I play. On the left side, it's just an amazing cymbal. I haven't found anything that comes close to it,
Right.
It makes some beautiful stuff. And
they really do.
I mean, obviously being in New York and on the road, I mean, when I'm on the road, you're always playing other people's stuff. You're bringing cymbals most of the times. But when you do play your own gear, I know when we talked, you were telling me we all love Gretsch drums. I mean, you're telling me your fondness for Gretsch, and I have a deal with Yamaha. I think you were telling me I remember you saying you favored Gretsch if you had to pick or whatever. Is your own personal gear Gretsch stuff?
Yeah. I have a few kits. Most of them are in DC, but the one I have up here is a Gretsch.
Okay.
A vintage Gretsch from 72. I think it's an ebony kit.
Oh, nice. Is it lacquer or is it wrap?
It's wrap.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's it's just, just like they've always been marketed as that great Gretsch sound.
Of course,
Can't get rid of that. And
I agree.
No matter what other kit I play, I always
try
to make it sound a Gretsch kit,
Yeah. I mean, I do that even with my Yamaha stuff. It's like there's still a Gretschiness that I go for with that sound as well. It's like it's on Melissa Aldana's newest record, is that your kit on that record?
That's my kit, yeah.
Yeah, because I was listening to that today, just prepping a little bit for this, and I mean, like you said, you're going for that even when you're not playing Gretsch drums. But I was hearing just the sound of the 12 and the 14 specifically. I was like, man, those have to be Gretsch drums, man, and you can hear like the sounds of rim shots on those drums. There's such a specific thing with those hoops. I was like, man, it has, and the tone is so beautiful, man. You're tuning,
thank you,
and high on there, but it's such a great sound, man.
Thank you.
I'm not trying to blow smoke. I mean,
no, I appreciate it.
Great player, man. I mean, some really beautiful stuff. Like, I don't want to get too drum geeky, but like lots of beautiful two-handed stuff on the cymbals that I don't hear a lot of people doing. At least people from like when I came up playing. Not to sound like an old guy. So many beautiful younger players now. Can you just talk a little bit about, for those that might not know about? I know you've been working a lot with Melissa's group. It's pretty much a working band.
Yeah.
If you want to just maybe speak on that a little bit about that group and the record.
Yeah, it's a very special group. I think out of all the groups I've ever had a pleasure to be a part of, this is by far my favorite.
Yeah.
Simply just because of the openness and the camaraderie. But also because we challenge each other. We always make each other kind of bring the best out of each other. When it comes to music and when it comes to, I think, the vision of the band. The way she operates is very much as a democracy, rather than to say this is my band.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's her. It very much is her band, but she's very gracious with responsibility, being delegated throughout the band. So that record was really special to do. For all those reasons, and also we worked with the great James Farber, who engineered that, and at Dave Stoller's studio and the Samurai Hotel in Queens. So the whole project was just, it felt very warm and very, a very collective, warm spirit, which was great. All the originals are hers. At that point, they had been arranged by Lage Lund, who's playing guitar and also produced that record.
Yeah.
And it's funny when you have, like, you play as a band certain tunes and then they're completely kind of revamped for a record, and it changes now we just have like two versions of a lot of those tunes, which is cool. We're planning on doing another record in, I think, like April, after we do the Vanguard 4 weeks.
Have you been playing that material yet? What will be recorded?
We're kind of slowly starting to incorporate the newer tunes.
Yeah.
It's a gradual process.
Sure. I understand. Yeah.
You know how it is. So, and things are still being written. So, but we are kind of slowly getting into working that material into the show. Yeah, it's always nice to be able to play stuff before you get around to recording it, Oh, for sure.
I've made so many records where you're like, you learn it and record it, and then you're like, oh man, like I wish I would have had some time with this music, it gets so much better later,
It's funny with that first record that we just did. We only played those versions of those tunes once before in a live setting.
Okay.
And we had maybe one or two rehearsals before that. So that music was very fresh on the record. And not overly rehearsed, I guess, is what I mean.
Yeah. I mean, from hearing the band live, I mean, it seems like you guys have a real identity as a group, and everyone plays so well. I mean, it's going to sound like you guys, whether it's new material or old material,
Right.
I mean, that's just something I've been realizing in general. It's like, we can all head trip on all this stuff. Like, for instance, like my cymbals got lost this year a couple times, one long period. And I just started getting fed up. Like, I'll just play whatever's there. I just kind of started to have that, like an old guys. I was just like, man, let me do what like Paul Motion and Joey Barron do and just play whatever's there, And I realized right away, like, even guys I play with all the time, like they don't really know the difference. It just sounds like me playing the drums, And I think when you're playing with a group, if I can somehow find a way to connect those things, like it's going to come off sounding like what you do. Like I said earlier, it'd be nice to have this extra time to develop it, but you might hear stuff from a year later and realize, it sounds like me all along. The thread is still there. It sounds like the way we play,
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, your identity is very much, it doesn't matter about the instrument as much as how do you utilize the instrument. Your sound's always going to come through.
Yeah.
And that happened to me too.
Yeah.
That happened to me with the cymbals. I had this I don't know if we probably talked about it a little bit.
I don't know.
Or maybe it had actually, I think it may have happened right after that.
Okay.
Where I lost my cymbals for pretty much the remainder of a tour.
Okay.
And I had to just play a bunch of cymbals that were there. And I had the exact same, reaction to it. I was like, maybe I should just be like Joey Barron, man. Just not care about this shit anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was interesting because through some of the cymbals, even though they could hear like sonically, it wasn't quite the texture or color of my cymbals, but they were like, yeah, but it still sounded like you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I saw a short video that Dan took, or somebody posted of Dan's group, Dan Wilson's group that I play with, and
right.
Like one of the first gigs I was playing some backline cymbals, and like if you saw what the models were, you were like, oh, these should sound really good. They were just particularly bad versions of those models,
Right.
But again, a camera from 10 feet away in the crowd, like I was like, oh yeah, it just sounds like me playing. I mean, I was like, oh yeah, it just sounds like me.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really great lesson to learn, is just to not obsess with that stuff and just try to be able to bring this stuff to light, the music to life, or to light, like, with whatever you're dealing with. And it helps you learn to focus on your touch and the playing and learning to get new things out of that. I mean, did you find that playing some unfamiliar cymbals as well?
I mean, for sure. I think it's always a lesson in how malleable you can be, you know, and how much you really have to take some time with the instrument and just like get acclimated to a surrounding that you're not used to.
Yeah.
So I definitely found that in those, because it was a hit or miss. Sometimes I got lucky, and sometimes the back line was like, okay, I know these cymbals. At least I know how to deal with these cymbals. Sure. And then sometimes, it was like, I can't use these. This is not going to work. This isn't gonna. And I got lucky enough to find someone. It was at a festival, actually, and I found someone that I knew, and I was like, "Oh, can I use your cymbals, please?"
Yeah,
I have to. You got to save me. But so it was definitely hit or miss. But I think it just helps you grow.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I had some really heinous cymbals at the Monterey Festival, and drums, like, really bad this year. And I was like, you know what, man? Like, they say don't have anything else. I'm just gonna play it, and of course that was like the day where I felt like everybody was seeing us play,
Right.
So for all they know, that might have been my gear, and it didn't matter at all. I just made it work,
Yeah.
So what else do you have ongoing? I mean, I know you, like you said, like you were talking about the special relationship and nature of Melissa's group, and you're going to be recording some more with that band, performances with that group. What else do you have happen? I know I'm skipping over all kind of things I wanted to cover, but
it's all good.
Tell me about some other things you have going on presently.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of work coming up with that band, for sure. I'm constantly still very, very much a freelancer, even though that is my main highest priority. And commitment. But I still do freelance quite a bit. I just recorded with Ethan Iverson, so that's going to come out at some point next year.
What was what was the trio recording? What was the?
It was a trio recording with Thomas Morgan.
Oh wow, great!
Yeah, and a bunch of cool originals that Ethan wrote.
Will that be another Blue Note record?
I believe that's a Blue Note record.
Oh man, I can't wait to hear that. That's great.
Yeah. So that'll be cool. That's really exciting. And then I'm still I'm still freelance. I have some more gigs with Ravi coming up. It feels like it's going to be an exciting year for some new collaborations too.
That's great, man.
So
I just saw what I think it might be recent footage. I was trying to find some just more stuff to hear of you the other night. I was just on a late night YouTube kind of bender, and I saw some stuff of you playing with Claffy and Kokoski and
Oh,
Seamus.
sure.
Who
Yeah.
else was on that? Was a singer on one tune. Was that for a record project or was that
That was
just
yeah, that was Claffy's record. It's actually out now. I
okay?
think it just came out recently, the full record. Yeah, that was a really fun project. He has a few other really great drummers. Aaron Kimmel.
I know Aaron really well. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and Adam Aruda. And so that was a really fun. That was a fun project to put together.
Oh,
There was
nice.
actually, I think there was a live. We did a live. There was like a live studio,
Live in the
an
studio,
audience.
right? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. At some point. So that was a lot of fun.
Nice, man.
Yeah.
Anything else? Anything else you want to plug?
I don't know. I think plugging wise, I think we're all plugged. Plugged
Yeah.
in. But yeah, I'm just looking forward to a really great year with some cool collaborations.
Yeah. Well, this is a stupid question. I'm going to ask it anyway, though. It's funny. I always tell, Mike Dawson is the host of this Drum Candy podcast, and my friend Tom Went and I have been kind of guest hosting a bunch of these. Especially if it's players we've met or we know people, pull people we know in just to kind of and just to give it some variety. But I always say, I try not to talk too much about too much drum like gear, and then Mike's like,
but it's a drum.
You think it's a drum gear thing, But this is I can't even believe I'm asking this, but what stick are you playing, man? What do you have one model you always play, or do you dance around?
I dance around pretty frequently, but right now I've been pretty consistent for the last, I would say, like 2 to 3 years, maybe even longer. I go in between because I used to be with Vic Firth, and now I'm kind of in limbo between them and Vader.
Okay.
So I've been trying out some Vader stuff. With Vic, I went to my go-to was the SD4 combo.
Okay, maple stick, yeah.
For maple stick for a long time, or the SD2 Bolero, which is completely two different.
So different, both maple sticks.
Different. Yeah, both maple sticks. It was more in my Brian Blade.
Yeah, you get that
years.
Blade knock kind of, yeah.
Yeah. But now I'm pretty much almost exclusively using the Vader. What is it? Jazz, but sugar maple.
What's the tip on that?
It's like a teardrop.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know it seems like a lot of guys that play Vader play the 8A sugar maple. Like people love those maple sticks with Vader,
I do love the maple. The sugar maples are pretty amazing because they just, I don't know, the lightest sticks I've ever felt with still having some, intensity behind them, still having some backbone behind them.
Yeah, I've been trying some maple stuff. I mean, we're all different. I always find myself going back to the hickory sticks, but there is something kind of cool about them,
I just can't play with hickory personally. It's just too dense, and I can't find that sweet spot with them, especially on the cymbal.
Sure. Yeah.
But that's a personal preference. I think some of my favorite drummers play hickory with no problem.
So sure, man. I think most people in just the history of drumming have played hickory sticks, but I mean,
right.
Excuse me. Yeah, I'd like to find some maple versions of some stuff. Just to if I could, it's hard to find that perfect thing. I kind of go back and forth between the 8D Firth, which is a little lighter than a 5A and a little heavier than a 7A. I got like a little longer 7A maybe, which is nice. It's a little front heavy, but sometimes I feel like it's a little more weight than I want, especially on the cymbals at times.
Yeah.
But if I go lighter if the taper gets too light at the front and they start to feel too springy, I feel like there's not enough sound.
I understand that. Yeah. I understand that. That's why I just go back and forth between so many things, because my taste for what I want to sound like and what I want to feel changes.
Sure. Yeah.
And it depends on the stick and the cymbal and the drums and the music I'm playing. It all varies.
Do you ever try nylons or always wood?
I went through a really heavy nylon phase. Between, I would say, like my first 5 years in New York.
Yeah.
And I used to think it was cheating for a while because I used it for that reason, because I was like, well, even if the stick is kind of crappy, I can still get a decent, consistent sound because it's a nylon tip.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and I just remember there was a point I was playing at Smalls one night, and Eric Rivas actually came up to me, and we were talking, and he was like, "Man, you sound incredible, but I think I would suggest you should stop using plastic."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Well, why do you think that?" You know. And at that point, I was like, "This is my stick," you know.
Yeah.
And he was just like, "Well, you know, there's this energy transference that happens between your hand and the stick to the cymbal.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have plastic that goes to the cymbal, it blocks off that energy. So you're only getting a certain kind of sound. You can't really get all of the sound that you want from your body, from your hand.
Yeah.
You know, you can't control the cymbal as much as you can when you have just wood hitting the stick.
Sure.
I mean, hitting the cymbal.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? So that just stuck with me. I don't know, you know.
That's really interesting to hear like a bass player come up and tell you that, you know?
Well, that's why I respected it even more, because it was someone from the outer perspective who plays, you know, an instrument that I always love to be very grounded with and very connected with.
Yeah.
Giving me an outer perspective of what they're feeling.
Yeah.
And it resonated with me. So I just never used plastic after that.
Yeah, I play wood always, and I have friends that go back and forth, or you know, you see these guys play a nylon in one hand and a wood in the other.
Right, sure.
It gets to be a little crazy. And then last week, a friend of mine, Mike Dawson, actually gave me he had some sticks laying around that he wasn't playing, and I took a pair of ADs in nylon, which I had never tried. And I just forced myself to use them on a gig. And I was like, oh, these sound better than I thought they would. And then, of course, then I'll never use them again. You know, I'm back to wood. But I was just curious about that, you know?
No, for sure. I mean, I definitely don't. I think all the cats that I love using nylon, I think it works for them.
Yeah.
You know, and it worked for me for a while. But I do feel like my sound is a little easier, more easily what's the word?
I know what you mean. Yeah.
It's
you
a little
connect that.
It's translated more easily
translated
through the wood.
Yeah.
You know?
Nice, man.
Yeah.
Any other newer recordings that we could check out? I know you plugged the Ethan thing and
well, there is one coming out, but I don't know exactly when it's coming out. I just recorded with this bass player Noam Weisenberg.
Okay.
That's a pretty fun record that's probably coming out sometime next summer, I believe.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I could be forgetting some stuff.
No, it's okay. But, it's hard to remember everything, man.
It's been a foggy few months, to be honest. A lot of travel, and
I hear you, man.
And it's good to be on the other side of the year.
Yeah, I've been kind of enjoying not being out so much. It's been I'm getting old though, so that's part of it, you know. Well, maybe we could do a part 2 of this sometime and get into some other stuff. I really appreciate you making time to talk, and I hope to catch up with you soon on the road, Kush, man. It's great to talk to you some more, and I really appreciate your time, man.
Absolutely, Dave, man. It's been a pleasure, man.
Definitely, man. Hope to see you soon, okay?
Absolutely.
All right, man. Peace. See you.
All right. Bye.
And that is it for this week's episode. If you enjoy the show, please give us a rating, drop us a review, like, share, subscribe, all that stuff. And also, don't forget, we have a Mark Guiliana masterclass coming up here at the end of April. It's limited. Tickets are moving. So if you want to come to Pittsburgh and hang out with Mark for a couple hours at Hawthorne Drum Shop, check the link in the description or in the video or the bio on our Instagram page. We want to see you, want to hang out. Okay, that's it. We'll see you next time.